All right, everybody, welcome back to the Financier. Today we have a special guest. We'll have Dr. Suresh Kumar joining in from NJIT. I'll do a brief introduction, and him and I will talk about the NJ ecosystem, what's happening in the state, and the ventures that are happening in the ecosystem. So without further ado, I'll bring in Dr. Suresh Kumar. Welcome, Suresh. How's everything going?
Everything is going fine, Vijar. Thanks for the opportunity to interact with you.
Absolutely. So it was great yesterday. So just to give everybody a quick background, Suresh and I know each other from Thai, New Jersey. We've been longstanding charter members. Suresh has done quite a bit of things in the technology space. I think I'll highlight just his experience at NextAge. I think you were founder and CEO of building that technology and regulatory compliance systems for the life sciences industry. And now, most recently, you're now a professor of entrepreneurship and innovation at NJIT, which is a very meaningful college and university in the New Jersey system. So I'd love to hear what you're doing in the ecosystem, how you transitioned, how you started in venture, and how you transitioned to your professorship.
Certainly, Vijar. So I've been an entrepreneur for about 20 years, so I wouldn't claim to be a academic for a long time. It's just been about 5 years. And the transition I made, I think, goes back to about 10 years, around the time that I got interested in the theory of why some people succeed as entrepreneurs and others don't, despite things being kind of similar. And that led me down the path of doing some research, reading up on it, ultimately doing a doctorate and getting my research published in a bunch of different conferences. And that led me to an opportunity to teach at Columbia University as an adjunct professor in the early 2013-14, following which then I was briefly involved with the SBDC at Rutgers. I, in fact, designed the Lean Startup program. And for the last 2 years, I've been with NJIT. Again, I kind of involved in designing the program from scratch. So that's been my academic experience.
So what were the questions you asked when you started? What were you looking for? What was the missing link or the gap between academics and the real world, the real practice? What were people missing?
So what I was quite surprised to find, because you think that America being the mecca of innovation and entrepreneurship, everything is well connected. But what I found is that there's a lot of gaps between academics, practice, and policy. So they're almost like independent worlds. For example, you have very few practitioners going into academic conferences and vice versa. So if you have a practitioner conference like TAI, there is hardly any academic involvement there. Similarly, the research that is done in the education field is not really translated into practice. So you have both of these parallel universes working separately and not much of interaction. So I felt there is a lot of room for bridging. And I consider myself to be a bridge builder between these two worlds.
Got it. So where do you focus most of your time? So in New Jersey, there's been a lot of engineering, like foundations from Bell Labs and Bell Works, what happened over there, how we created a lot of the R&D that came from either government or universities really helped build the foundation of what's technology today. Do you spend a lot of time in the engineering schools? You went from Columbia, Rutgers, and now NJIT, which is predominantly engineering, or do you focus mostly on the business side?
Well, I focus mostly on the business side, but then these days, almost everything has a technology underpinning. So you really it's easier to teach a computer science student to build an app, and you need to then just build the business around them. So I think it's a little easier to teach somebody who's already got a good understanding of technology as to how to take a business forward, especially in the technologies area.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I've been more involved in.
Got it. Okay, so why don't we move into it? So then you're focused on these students. What do you teach them when it comes to the business of technology? With the resilience and grit, like what do they have to actually, one, practice and then really put in a lot of effort into to really be successful?
So I spent a lot of time focusing on building grit and resiliency. These are terms that's quite often used, sometimes I think overused. But if you look at it, if you go back to the days since the Mayflower arrived in 1920, it's been grit and resilience that has made America the superpower that it is today. So American exceptionalism, I think, is built on grit and resilience. So I think it's important to understand that and see how it can be learned, right? So the question is that can it be learned? Many people think that it is either you have it or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I look at it, it can be learned, and it can be learned with this idea called deliberate practice. And just to give you a quick example, if you want to be good at running, for example, now you have many people who go for a jog and they come back, they do it maybe a few times a week, and they see that they're not reducing their weight or they're not getting any fitter. But if you do it in a deliberate fashion, which means that if you were to time yourself, improve the distance, make sure that you're maybe running in a different route gets more difficult as you go along. And if you then also put in equipment, for example, you're wearing the right gear, you're wearing the right shoes, and you're doing it, let's say, in sand and in different conditions, that's how you can tend to improve. And this principle actually is applicable pretty much in any endeavor, including entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
So you can do entrepreneurship, and with deliberate practice, you can become an expert, which is the reason why serial entrepreneurs do well in this and seem to be effortlessly doing it. But what's on behind it is this traditionally called as about 10,000 hours of deliberate practice required to make you an expert. So that's what I focus more on.
So what's a good example of you either applying that or a student applying that today? Daily, either they're looking at some performance metrics. What are some good areas that you either focused on or recommend others to focus on in that space?
So in terms of the educational aspect, I tend to design programs that are more experiential, which means that you really need to be connected, rather learn by doing, rather than theory, because entrepreneurship is not an exact science, unlike a physics or a chemistry or math, where you can learn it by theory. Right. So here you've got to really learn by doing, and the only way to do that is really involve with the community, talk to entrepreneurs who have done it, and kind of learn it by actually taking an idea and moving it down the line and making a prototype out of it. And just that very act of building something from nothing makes you more resilient and kind of gives you the foundation of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So I'd like to highlight one of your successes that I know is Parth. I think Parth Shah, right, from Startup Tribe.
Parth Mehta, you're right.
Mehta, yeah. How he went from 0 to 6 figures relatively quickly after graduating from NJIT. What were some, like, maybe 2 or 3 things that you either showed him or guided him to get to that level of success?
See, well, firstly, you're right. He is one of the success stories that I'm very proud of. But I would not claim that I kind of molded him from scratch. He actually came with a lot of grit and resilience because he lived in India. He went to school in India and the US. So he kind of went through a lot of experiences that made him who he is today.
Yeah.
So, but what I helped him with is how do you take an idea and use relationship marketing to kind of scale it and build your first 10, 15 customers. So he's been able to successfully do that. And talking about grit and resilience, I think one thing that really made him stand out is he made a decision that I'm not going to take up a job for the next 2 years. Right? And that's, I think, one of the challenges, frankly, in an institution like NJIT, where you have a lot of kids who come from economically challenged circumstances. They really need to take up a job. So he made that call. I'm not going to do so. I'm going to give it a shot for 2 years. And that gave him the bandwidth to be able to kind of scale up and get into that 6-figure in the second year as an entrepreneur.
Got it. So what else do you have that, like, students like that have shown that type of, are there been other cases like that have graduated, or they're?
Yes. So in my program, we have about approximately about 50 odd students between about two different courses. And of them, there is about, I would say on average, about 2, 3 teams that kind of move on from the classroom to really launch a company. So that's been the per semester. So that's been happening. So the important thing really is to make them understand that failure is okay, because that's something which our education system really does not encourage. So
Hmm.
you really don't have room to fail as a student in primary and high school. So how do we kind of take them in and tell them that do something, it's okay to fail, learn from it, and build it a little bit better, which is kind of behind the lean startup philosophy that I teach. So
Yeah.
it's that mindset that I try to inculcate. The technology, frankly, is the easy piece. The important thing is how do you get them comfortable with failure, doing things over and over again, gaining the expertise through working at it again and again. That is the more difficult part, which I try to teach in the courses.
Have any of the students tried to do physical or hardware related problems, like something that's not app related?
Yes, so we had a few students who are doing hardware things like drones.
Hmm.
One of the teams called Volant, as you know, finished in one of the top competitions, the Thai global competitions. They won an award in that. So that was a hardware based, but that actually drew on the resilience of the founder, who was an ex-Marine. So I think we all always come back to the topic of resilience, because that's really what makes things happen.
Right, right. So he was the one that was it the farming or national parks where they can inspect in waves? Was that the drone business?
No, this was a military reconnaissance drone,
Okay.
more like a swarm of drones that, based on his experience as a Marine Ranger, so they used to actually physically go in and do reconnaissance. And that's the most dangerous part of any military operation, because you're going into enemy territory really without in darkness in most cases.
Yeah.
And they're mostly sitting ducks. So his plan was to come up with a drone, a swarm of drones that could be launched. And these are small, tiny drones, but interconnected in a mesh network, and can relay back information uh, and get a lot of intelligence with almost minimal risk to people.
Amazing, amazing. Wow. I think that's a huge application. I think it's been used in quite a bit of spaces. All right. So actually, you have more experience in this than I do for Thai Global. How has that startup ecosystem been? How's it expanded, leveled up companies from the local chapters, the New Jersey areas, to more the national footprint?
So I think Thai Global, frankly, is one of the most robust ecosystems. And it works because you have this philosophy of successful entrepreneurs giving back their time and, in many cases, money to. Uh,
Hmm.
and that happens across 60 chapters in all over the world. US, of course, is where it all started. So you had this mentoring philosophy that's been in place for decades, and that is right now paying off. So you have the Thai global competition, which actually is a worldwide competition, almost a year long, but it culminates in a pitch competition, which used to be in Silicon Valley.
Hmm.
And last year it was done virtually because of COVID. But that really draws in the cream of the crop. And many of those companies go on to launch and be successful ventures. So I think it's been a great success story, and I'm proud to be part. And you've been a great part of that too, Vijar. So
It's been amazing. Thai itself, I mean, yesterday's event with the charter member and the procurement discussions, I think it's a really good way to really foster entrepreneurship, as they say, from the early stages to even the late stages. It's been very impressive. But Thai Global and the angel networks and the communities I've been a part of have been, I've watched a lot of people blossom from here to India. So it's been quite spectacular. So what are some ideas that you have for improving the student startup outcomes? What do you think the students should do, whether they're in the semester, they just graduated, What are some recommendations that you have for them to improve their chance of success, whether they raise money or they don't?
So my first recommendation actually is more for the university system or the education system, you can say, which is that make one entrepreneurship course mandatory for every student. Doesn't matter whether you're doing history or literature or whatever. I think one course in entrepreneurship is an absolute essential for life, right? And even if you don't start a venture, you're going to just learn the techniques of how to be entrepreneurial, think like an entrepreneur. And I think that itself will be a great value add. And once you do that, of the thousands of students who are coming into the education system, there would be a few hundred who would like to then explore it further with an idea.
Yeah.
And that is where maybe this more formalized courses would help. But then beyond that, as soon as they're ready to pass out, that's when you really need to put some resources at their disposal. Because I think it's unfair to expect a student to have a startup, forgo a six-figure salary, and take all this risk by themselves, right? So you need to really give them some support, more like a small bridge, about a year, 2 years, where they can really test their idea. And if their idea is scalable and if the model is validated, that's when maybe we can throw even more resources and make it work. So
Yeah.
that's, I think, the model which would really work for the entire country.
I found the startup case competitions, the ones that pressure you to, compete against other startups in a period of time, 30, 60 days, have been really eventful. Like, they're very impactful for the young students. I judged one, and the winner for 1 year was a Catholic studies major. He started a watch company, and it did six figures in sales while he was in college. And he had the best business. It was clear. He was making money. It was profitable. It was a big business. And he had no finance or business background. He just did something he loved.
In fact, Vijay, what I found worked really well is when you have a team that's really diverse, right? So you don't want too many engineers in the team. You want somebody who maybe you definitely need that technical background, but you also need somebody who's got maybe an arts major, maybe somebody who's a different ethnic background, somebody who maybe a women member. So the more diverse the team is, I found that they're able to, then new ideas come to the table.
Yeah.
And you're able to kind of understand culture, etc., and you're able to build a better product overall.
Right.
So I agree with you on that.
So before we wrap up, what do you recommend? So you mentioned Lean Startup. I guess you probably recommend that book if you've not read it, or any other startup books that you recommend?
Well, I'm a big fan of Steve Blank's book and his writing, so I would certainly recommend that, apart from Eric Ries, who's written the Lean Startup. So I think between them, frankly, they cover all bases, but you have a lot of stuff available on YouTube. If you want to get quick few-minute refresher courses on these books and programs. But I also highly recommend there is a Udacity free course called Lean Startup. It's just called Lean Startup. And that's something which I would encourage every budding entrepreneur to take and just kind of learn the basics.
And what about actually NJIT? What do they offer, either for students or visiting students or something, in or outside of the campus? Do they do anything like that as well?
Yeah, they have an incubator called Venturelink. So the students that go through my course, and if they have promise, then I kind of refer them over to Venturelink. And Venturelink has got a lot of facilities in terms of not just office space, but also mentoring and sometimes capital too. But we also connect them with a lot of federal programs where funding is available through the NSF grants, etc. So we open up those opportunities for students who are serious. Mm-hmm. And these are all kind of small pathways that will kind of push them forward with their idea and hopefully get to a stage where they can then start acquiring customers and getting revenues.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Suresh. Again, always a pleasure. I wish we could meet more often in person, but that'll be held off for a couple months. But thank you again for doing this. I really appreciate this. If you have any parting say, feel free to chime in, or where people can contact you or reach out to you. This will all be available on LinkedIn and YouTube, so it'll be streaming afterwards as well.
Well, I think my parting line would be the one that I use quite often, which is that entrepreneurship is a community sport. And therefore, I think it's let's not put everything on an entrepreneur for success. It's got to be the community also has a role to play, and you can do it by being a customer, investor, advisor. There are so many roles that the community members can play to help an entrepreneur succeed. So I hope it will be a two-way, and we can make it work. We can get more entrepreneurs succeed.
Yeah, I think that's the customer point was very well noted. Very few people mentioned that. I think spending and purchasing from these businesses is just as important as starting them.
Exactly. And it could actually, in this environment, it could be the difference between success and failure of a business. So I think it's extremely important that you make your purchases as much as you can locally. Now, there are a few things that you can only get on Amazon, but it's a bunch of stuff that you can get locally. And to the extent you can do so, I think that'll be helpful for the local entrepreneurs.
Excellent. Excellent. That's perfect. Great way to end it. Thank you, Suresh. Again, really appreciate this. Until next time, I'll see everybody, and we'll be signing off.
Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you.